Halloween was supposed to be my night off, a full escape from the grind of endless emails and office politics. I'd booked a quaint little cottage out in the countryside, envisioning a night filled with popcorn, cheap Halloween candy, and a cheesy lineup of spooky movies. Just me, a cozy fire, and some well-deserved solitude. The drive to the cottage was scenic, with burnt orange leaves blanketing the ground and the sky that deep, endless gray only autumn can bring. I found the place nestled down a winding road, like something out of a postcard, with ivy crawling up the stone walls and a tiny chimney puffing smoke. When I stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar, and everything felt old in the best way, worn in by years of warmth and secrets. After unpacking and lighting the fire, I pulled on my comfiest sweater, spread out a bag of candy, and sank into the overstuffed armchair. The place was utterly silent, and it wrapped around me like a comforting hug. Outside, the wind rattled through the trees, and I settled deeper, the crackle of the fire soothing. The whole scene felt perfect, like something magical was waiting in the air. But the silence began to shift. A soft creak from the floorboards made me freeze, heart thudding. I told myself it was the house settling, or maybe a mouse. Still, I found myself glancing around, eyes darting over the darkened corners, almost as if I expected someone to be there. Another creak, closer this time. "Get it together, Lucy," I whispered, though I didn't sound convinced. I tried to ignore it, reaching for my popcorn and flicking through the horror movies I'd planned to binge. But then, just as I clicked play, a shadow shifted at the corner of my vision. A trick of the firelight, I told myself, but my nerves were no longer in my control. I peered into the dim room, half expecting to see nothing, and yet a shape materialized by the far wall. I sat bolt upright, breath caught in my throat, as he stepped forward. I could see him now, clearly, a man, his figure translucent but somehow vivid, dressed in clothes from another century. He was tall, with dark hair curling at his neck, his face drawn with an artistic flair. There was a deep sadness in his eyes, the kind that hinted at a tragic story beneath the surface. My mind scrambled for logic, but I was frozen in my seat, every nerve alert to his every move. He looked at me, and it was as though he saw straight through me, not just physically, but into my very soul. Who are you?" My voice trembled, barely more than a whisper. The ghost, he was unmistakably a ghost, I realized now, smiled, but there was something unhinged in the twist of his lips. "I was Henry. This was my cottage once," he said, his voice low and lingering, a note of melancholy woven through his words. "I came here to escape, to find peace." There was a vulnerability in his voice, an ache that drew me in despite myself. Against all reason, my fear eased, softened by an inexplicable sense of empathy. Here was a man who, in life, had sought the same solace I had. We talked, if you could call it that. I listened as he told me of his passion for art, how he'd come to this cottage to paint the world around him, hoping to capture beauty and meaning. The candlelight flickered as he recounted moments of despair, his voice lilting with poetic phrases, full of wistful longing. I felt mesmerized, swept into his world, my pulse steadying as I relaxed into his story, captivated by the ghost of a man who'd once been hopelessly, romantically alive. Then he moved closer, so close I could almost feel the brush of his hand as he reached toward me, eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made me shiver. "I've been alone here for so long," he murmured, his gaze piercing. "But tonight, you're here with me." The room grew colder, but I stayed rooted in place, his presence pulling me in like a warm undertow. A strange thrill curled in my stomach, a flutter that felt like attraction mixed with dread. Then his hand brushed my cheek, ice cold. It jolted me, and I suddenly felt like a caged bird, caught in his sorrowful, relentless gaze. "I don't want to be alone anymore," he whispered. A chill of realization crept over me, and my heart sank as I tried to pull back. But he moved with me, his face shifting from yearning to something darker, a sharp edge of possessiveness that hadn't been there moments before. I couldn't escape his grip, not physically, but in some deeper, more primal way. His hand reached out, pressing cold and insistent against mine, and I could feel the strength of his will, a tether binding me to him. "Wait!" I stammered, heart pounding wildly. "I need to go. Please, let me go." He tilted his head, the sadness in his eyes now mingling with something sinister. "I've waited so long for someone like you to come. This place, it keeps us, you see, traps us. And now it has you too." I tried to move, to break free from his hold, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as though the air had thickened, trapping me, drawing me closer to him, even as every fiber of my being screamed to run. "No!" I gasped, struggling against the force that held me. "I didn't come here to stay." A shadow passed over his face, the warmth vanishing from his gaze, replaced by a cold, consuming hunger. He leaned closer, his face inches from mine, his words soft but suffused with an ominous finality. "But you came to my cottage, on this night. You're exactly where you're meant to be." The room spun, darkness creeping at the edges of my vision as his hand trailed down my arm, as cold as death. His fingers tightened, pulling me closer until his face filled my view, his sadness now something far darker, far hungrier. And then, just as a shadow seemed to swallow me whole, I felt myself stumble backward, gasping for air as his grip slipped. The coldness faded, replaced by the warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth. I was alone in the room again, my body shaking as I clutched my arms around myself, breath coming in shallow gasps. I glanced toward the wall where he had stood, half expecting to see him there still, but there was nothing. Only the flicker of firelight on old, silent walls. Yet, as I gathered my things in trembling hands, too terrified to stay a moment longer, I could still feel his gaze watching me from the shadows, waiting, hoping. Because he knew I would come back, and somehow, so did I.